of churches in America especially unwilling to take on the responsibility of being Bereans, of being willing to say, hey, Pastor Chris, what did you just say here? And if, in fact, churches have done this, if individual believers have been Bereans, I think a lot of the theological problems that we have in North America would be at least mitigated, if not taken care of. With that, we continue our journey through 1 John chapter 2, picking up where we left off in verse 5. But whoever keeps his word, in him truly the love of God is perfected. By this we know that we are in him. In keeping our word, in being Christians and telling our community that we are Christians, we need to actually walk the walk and talk the talk. In my journeys, especially to the sale barn recently, it's one of the things that often comes up in overhearing conversations about, especially for those who don't normally go to church in our community, they are looking at each and every single one of us. They're looking to see if those of us that call ourselves Christians can walk the walk and talk the talk. They're looking to see how we use our words. They're seeing if we can match our actions with our words. They're looking to see, and they see people using great Christian lingo, that we're saved, that we follow Christ, we gather to worship, all these Christian words. But if our actions don't match the words, what use is all that great lingo? All that great church speak eventually means nothing. Thankfully, I've heard good reports by overhearing conversations that those that are called Christians here in Philip, by the outside community, see people that are trying to walk the walk and talk the talk. I'm thankful for that this morning. It's something that was always a huge issue in Southern California, was we had a bunch of cultural Christians that could have learned the lingo, but didn't know how to put one foot in front of another in walking the Christian life. My hope and prayer is that as we continue in 1 John, that we together would continue to learn to walk in the light as he is in the light. That we are able to share that light with all of those that are around us. I was looking at some facts just this week that up to 70% of South Dakota, of individuals in South Dakota, not just here in Philip and Milesville, have never set foot in a church. I find it hard to believe, but that's what the 70%. Now, I don't know if that included going for funerals and weddings, but let's just say it was just for church services. 70% of those in the state in which we live have never attended a church service before. So that means then that they're looking at each and every one of you to see what a Christian is like. Let's just take it as half of those that are around us. Determine their understanding of what a Christian is by how you walk and how you talk. That's a big burden upon all of us. And yet, Jesus said that his burden was light, his yoke was easy. But it's hard to watch the tongue. On Sunday nights, we've been talking about the power of the tongue for the last couple of weeks. And how quickly that you can build someone up, and yet through one careless word, one act of either anger or hers can tear down everything that you've tried to work out. The same is true for the reputation of us as Christians in our community. All it takes is for those that have never stepped inside of these four walls to see our use of words. One careless slip-up, one argument, change their opinions about who Christians really are. Now, is that fair? No. Just as in talking with my family and in telling them that many Christians, especially those that have just become Christians, there's a process of what we call, with the big fancy Christian term, sanctification. We become more and more like Christ, the more and more we are in the light. That's not necessarily the case immediately. So often, those that are around us look at someone who's maybe just become a Christian and go, well, how is he a Christian if he's still smoking and drinking and cussing and all those other things? It's hard to get our community to understand that we are sinners who have a Savior and that we are daily trying to be like Him. That's when those tough conversations need to happen with our friends and neighbors. And being willing to admit that we are imperfect, but we serve a perfect God. Praying and hoping that as I get to listen to these conversations at Jimmy's and at the sail barn, that in having my coffee and breakfast, that our community can get to know us as real, authentic people first. And then they start to connect the dots between how we live our lives, how we deal with issues in our lives in light of Christ. That they would be able to see our connection with God and how it affects our connections with other people. One of the things I overheard is how the church as a body reacted when we lost a loved one up in Milesville. I was able to overhear how we gathered together and they saw that, yes, we missed our brother. We were sorrowful that he was gone, but they also saw the celebration of life, but also that we weren't hopeless in not seeing him again. That we have hope in the resurrection, and hope in meeting with him in the air and to be with Christ forever. Both those that have been around church, and maybe those that are around us that have never been to church, got to see the Christian life played out in one of the worst times in people's lives is when you lose a loved one. The big question for us this morning is that when the trials of life come, are we willing to watch our words, watch our feet, to watch where we are stepping, as to let our friends and neighbors know that despite whatever comes in my way, this is the path that God has before me. That no matter whether it's losing a loved one, whether it's losing a job, whether it's issues in our marriages, that we will continue to walk in the light as He is in the light. So that those that are outside of these four walls can say, I know that they could have only gotten through that. Not because they're any special. Not just because Chris is a Christian. No, that he serves a God that is able to get him through that. As we are keeping our words, we show that love is perfected. It's so unfortunate, I think, in our English language that we only have one version of the word love. In Greek, there's 5. And so often we get kind of confused when we read our Bibles because it's not delineating between brotherly love or a love in which is unconditional. So often, just as on Friday night, Dr. Howard and I were telling each other that, I love you, brother. And yet, I took a couple of steps back mentally and went, well, if someone who's outside of these four walls heard that, what would they think? Are they going to think that somehow there's some homosexual relationship between Dr. H and I? And some people could come to that conclusion because love in the English, predominantly because our culture and our society has made it either a relational word or a sexual word. There's no delineations between loving each other in Christ and loving my family members or loving the neighbor that lives next to me. That is why we need to be careful in the words in which we use, because people are watching us day in and day out. Whether we like it or not, there are those that are not here this morning in our community that are watching us very carefully. Almost as though they have a magnifying glass on us, looking to see what does a Christian life look like. I know it's almost, maybe you've never thought about that before. Or maybe you've thought about it and felt the great pressure of living a life for Christ in the midst of a microscope. But if there's one thing I've learned about this congregation in the last few months, is that God is working in mighty ways in each and every single one of your lives. And that I pray that we get to display that for our community to see. Be willing to go, you know what? Yes, I'm having issues here, but God is faithful. That God is shining the light on my path so that I can take one step in front of another. It may be baby steps. They may not be giant strides of racing from one end to the other. Maybe God is purposely having you take baby steps so that other people can see how we get through life. Maybe there's friends or neighbors that are going through things that we have never been through. Troubles, trials, tribulations. You just take the crops this year. A lot of people up north from us are just now planting crops, and they're trying to figure out the timing and figure out how they're going to be able to harvest before they need to plant their next set of crops. And then all of a sudden their machines are breaking down and they're getting frustrated with life. But then they see their Christian neighbors coming over and helping them out. They're seeing them, giving them advice on how best to weather the storm, so to speak, because there's been a little bit too much moisture. Well, actually that's a blessing, but there's also in this case is a little bit of a curse. But our friends and neighbors are seeing how we react to these situations. I would love to see the love of God perfected in each and every one of our lives. That no matter if it's relationships with families, that we can take on that phileo love, brotherly love, in which to show to our families that despite our arguments, despite our disagreements, much as I talked about the last couple of weeks of wanting to choke my cousin. I love her to death, but I still want to show love to her, but instill sometimes deep down, I would love to lovingly strangle her. Is despite that disagreement, I would want my family to see that despite the fact that we disagree on many things, I still love them. They're still my family. And maybe even in here this morning, there may be disagreements between each other. Even though Paul says this ought not to be so, those that are around us are looking to see how we deal with it. Whether we can sit at the table and come to an agreement. Sit at the table and go, I love you in Christ, but sometimes you just make me mad. And you know what? That's okay. If we can display healthy relationships, and in this case, in 1 John 2:5, healthy love relationships, whether it be friends, your family, your spouse, your children, that affects everyone around us. Our world, our communities need to see healthy relationships. Because to be honest, when you look at the rest of the world, let's just take South Dakota. We live in a messed up world. With people in unideal situations and unideal relationships that end badly. I would love to see the averages in Christian homes that end in divorce to be diminished, but unfortunately our neighbors see that it's just the same as those that do not claim to walk and live in Christ. Now, we won't go into the biblical backgrounds for legitimate reasons for divorce, but if we cannot say that we are different, if we cannot say that we have been changed and point to a Savior that has changed us, no wonder the outside world goes, what's the point? We're in such a microscope. We need to be constantly reminded, constantly have the knowledge that we are in Him and not of ourselves. That we are in Christ and not in Chris. What would a life look like if we were to realize that we are in Him every day? What would a life look like from the outside, from our friends and our neighbors, to see Christ in Chris? Verse 6. Whoever says he abides in Him ought to walk in the same way in which He walked. Now, Jesus walking, we notice throughout the Gospels that there was a mixture of special events, shall we say, in His life. Whether it's talking and having serious spiritual conversations with people, or sitting down with His boys and having dinner. We can live life day by day in Him just as He lived. Authentic, real, Christian life. See, you notice in the Gospels, how often does Jesus use big theological words? I can't think of a single instance. How often does Jesus try and complicate things through the use of big verbiage and big words? No, in fact, many times Jesus takes a seat, sits down with everybody, and just goes, this is how it is. See, Jesus gave us the perfect example of living real, authentic life. And that He lived life with His boys for 3.5 years. He ate with them. Many nights they had the sleepless nights together. Many nights they were under the same weather conditions. Many nights there was the pains and the sufferings. But they lived life together. And those that were around Jesus and the disciples saw it day in and day out. Same should be true for us. That as we live life together, as we sit and have suppers together, as we sit and have breakfast over at the sail barn, that our friends and neighbors would be able to say, there's some real Christianity going on there. There's some real faith being displayed. Not boisterously, not loud, not saying, everybody look at me, that you see what we're doing, this is real Christianity. No, it's living life together. And that as we do that, I'll continue to hear the things that I have been at the sale barn and at James about CEFC, living life together and showing Christ in how we walk, how we talk.